Hello, welcome again. If you've never watched us before, to Full Record Jacket. No, actually, it would be welcome again if you have watched us before, and welcome if you haven't watched us before. Oh
Fair,
dear,
fair.
never mind. Um,
Good
you
start.
join you join us mid conversation, and we are talking about you two, not you
Us too.
two or us two, but the prominent Irish rock group who have existed since 1978, I think. So Ben's just been we're talking about you two for a number of reasons. Obviously, they've just announced their Las Vegas residency. There has been talk about Larry Mullen, the drummer, having his back surgery, and Bono wrote a book not long ago. And Ben listened last night to some of Achtung Baby
I did.
and wanted to talk about them. So, Ben, talk about you too.
Well, what is there to say, Philster? Yeah, it's
Tell,
the first time I've put Actung Baby on. To be fair, U2 is one of those bands. I think I said to you yesterday. They're almost like, to me, they're almost like a singles band. You sort of know them for the big singles, but a bit like Coldplay, a bit of a singles band, not really an albums band. But listen to Actung Baby, I can actually see why you appreciate them a lot. And I
well,
did listen to
they are an
All That You
albums
Can't
band
Leave
and a
Behind a
singles
lot,
band. Yeah, I think they're
and a
both
singles
really, aren't
band.
they? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I think I've underestimated their back catalogue somewhat. I think, but like I said, I used to love All That You Can't Leave Behind. I used to listen to that album quite a lot. I liked pop, liked some of the songs off of that. And How to Dismantle, is it How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb with Vertigo, where he counts in Spanish and doesn't actually count it in Spanish, or it doesn't actually mean anything, does it? Or something along those lines. But yeah, no, I'm here to be educated, Phil, really. And you said Irish band, even though I think the Edge was born in Barking. And do you know what his brother's called?
Um, you told me I've forgotten.
Richard, but he likes to go by the name Dick. And then you've got the Edge, whose name's Dave. So you got Dick and Dave, which I think would have been a great folk rock duo together. To be fair, so
Well, my history with you two, very, very briefly, obviously grew up in the 80s. I was a little bit young for their early stuff. In fact, I was way too young for their early stuff because I was only a very small kid. Obviously, they became really big, really, really big with the Joshua Tree. I wasn't quite dialed into them at that point. I didn't really start to. I can't remember what the first track that I really. The thing is, you heard a lot of it, so it's difficult to know where I first heard them. But
yeah, it's
the first
difficult to have
one,
that reference period,
the
isn't
first
it?
one I listened to when I was trying to get, I got hold of a copy of the Rattle and Hum album out of the library, and so obviously that was my first introduction to them. But then in the early 90s, of course, they did Achtung Baby, which was quite radical at the time for them, particularly when they released The Fly as the lead off single to that. Very, very different to anything they'd done before. I was quite intrigued and I got into it, but I wasn't massively invested in the older U2 in the way that fans who'd been fans for a while were. So some of those fans were a bit resistant to the new direction. Of course, I was more open to it. And I really liked that album. And I went to see the tour. I went to see the Zoo TV tour. I saw them at Wembley in August of '93, which I still, for me, even though I don't ever necessarily list U2 as one of my very favourite bands, although I do like them quite a lot. For me, that's one of the gigs that really sticks in my memory. It was a really great show.
Well,
And I,
that Zoo TV, I think it got released on VHS, and that was probably the first time. I would obviously probably heard the songs, because they're probably all over the radio. But first time I sort of really found out about them, because I was like, "Oh, Zoo TV, that looks." Didn't realise it was going to be a concert, and I think I actually bought it from from somewhere. I've got it on VHS somewhere, but I thought it was going to be a film. I just looked at the front cover and thought, "Oh yeah." kind of idiot I was back then, I suppose.
It was a really good concept. It was, I mean, nothing like it, quite like that had been done before. I know Pink Floyd had done big stagings with the wall and everything, but this with the video screen and the whole theme of media saturation and everything, it was a bit ahead of its time in that sense. I mean, this was before the internet, of course, so it was really all about TV and pop culture.
And MTV, I suppose.
And MTV and all that kind of thing. And it was, the backdrop to it was the Sarajevo War, which obviously gave Bono the chance to do a little bit of his political stuff. But yeah, I would consider with U2, I consider myself to be a fan. I mean, I've been to their concerts 3 times. I've got most of the albums, so I guess I do qualify for sure as a fan. I'm not a mega fan who worships every single, word
that comes out of them.
No, not like that. But and I do understand why they are a bit Marmite, because serious music fans do tend to be a bit split on them, don't they? If you talk to music geeks and people who are really into music, they might like U2 or they might be a hater, and there are quite a few haters.
Yeah, I've always been in the meh.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. I kind of felt like I should like them because of, Britpop. I'm not going to use the word Britpop because I shouldn't use it because it's horrible. But because I was an Oasis fan, you kind of think, I should like U2, but I've never sort of really been like, oh yeah, I've got to buy that.
Well, you had a reason to be open to U2 as an Oasis fan because Noel Gallagher said nice things about them, didn't he? I think he.
Yeah, and I think they didn't they support them in 97?
That may be the case. Yeah, I didn't see them support U2 in 97, but
I think it was on their American tour. I'm sure they supported U2 in America. I'm almost convinced. I mean, I won't bet my house on it, but I'm pretty sure they supported during that sort of time. I mean, I was completely blown away by the fact that when All That You Can't Leave Behind came out and Beautiful Day, that Bono was only 40. Well, most of them were only 40. And I'm like, I'm sure back then I thought he was in his 50s. I'm always convinced by that. But yeah, it's amazing. You kind of lose.
When you're younger, the older rock stars seem really old, and then you get to a certain age and you look back and you think, oh, actually, they weren't that old at that time.
No. But I like that album. That I really, at the time, I listened to that album a lot, and I think Beautiful Day was sort of like the big hit at the time, wasn't it? On it, and it was sort of overplayed, but even now when I hear that song, I still really like it. I've only actually I didn't realise till I put it on before we started, I've never seen the music video for it until about 10 minutes ago.
It's interesting because I felt, you see, my view on it was I really liked Achtung Baby. I did dig Zooropa, that was the follow-up, that was a bit more electronic and even more experimental, borderline weird. I liked that as a follow-up that wasn't supposed to be a major album. It was something that just evolved out of the tour, but I liked that. I liked the Pop album in 97, even though the band have kind of disowned it and some people don't like it. But I can understand why, but I like it.
Have you noticed that came out in 1997 and so did Be Here Now? And both of those albums from that, apart from Liam Gallagher, who loves Be Here Now, but Noel and Bono and The Edge have all sort of stood back from those albums releasing that year.
That's true. U2, I mean, the degree, sorry, spit it out.
Get it out, Phil.
The degree to which they've disowned it, when they did their compilations in the year 1999-2000, they only put tracks from the Pop album on in remixed form, which shows that they really did feel it hadn't been finished. The story behind it is their manager, Paul McGuinness, booked the Pop Mart tour for the summer of 97, which obviously they'd agreed to. But they'd been making this album for some time before that. And then they still hadn't finished it to their satisfaction. But obviously it was time to start the tour. And so the album had to come out because they couldn't start the tour without the new album. So it was never finished to what they wanted, and so for that reason they've always had a bit of a downer on it. But I still think it's very good. I like the diversity of songs on there. I like the songwriting. I think it's a good album to listen to all the way through. There are U2 fans who love it and some who don't like it, but I'm in the like camp with that one.
Yeah, I quite like pop. I didn't listen to it a lot, but I suppose it's like when somebody comes round to your house and they go, "Oh, your house is lovely. It's really nice," and you're sat there going, "I hate that bit. I hate that bit, and I hate that bit." And I suppose when you're creating it and you're seeing it every day, and it's not how you want it, you're going to be like, "This is awful,"
Yeah.
and you become self-deprecating, I suppose, in a way, but.
Artists often are like that, though. They often
Yeah.
don't necessarily judge their own work in the same way as the fans do. But then I was slightly disappointed with All That You Can't Leave Behind, because I'd felt that they'd kind of abandoned that sort of questing, experimental and playful side to them, and they'd gone back to being more like, or trying to be like, the old U2.
Like Joshua
was
Tree.
not really. I mean, it's a bit different album to that, but they were,
Yeah.
and they were almost trying to, with Beautiful Day, I felt they were kind of trying to have a hit, you know.
It is an album that is trying to have 12, 13 hits on it.
And with Elevation, I felt, although those songs actually, I must admit, work very well in concert. Beautiful Day and Elevation do work great on stage. I felt on record they're good, but for me, not super great. But that was just my view of it. And I also, again, with the Atomic Bomb album, again, there is good stuff on there, but again, I felt it wasn't an album that totally excited me like those ones in the 90s had done. And so I've been a little bit, but I did like a lot the one that got people's backs up, the freebie on the iPod and the iPhone, Songs of Innocence. I really do like that a lot. It grew on me quite quickly, and I do like Songs of Innocence. Although,
did you get it free?
Yeah, I got it free.
Yeah,
and I had it on in the car a lot at the time, but I do buy the argument that the songs were better done live, and maybe the album was overproduced. It is a kind of 80s throwback style album in a way, but not to the music that U2 were doing in the 80s, but more like, well, maybe like, I don't know. It's kind of a throwback.
Duran.
Well, almost. So I don't know what I'm trying to say, really, but
without the suits.
Yeah.
And the boats.
But you see, I do feel inclined to defend U2 against the people who really slag them off, because although Bono is clearly, he's a lead singer of a band, and they usually are a little bit out there, aren't they? And you have to have an ego to be the lead singer of a band. So I don't mind that.
Yeah.
And
I think it's the only way you survive, isn't
exactly. it? And see, my view on any of these artists is I don't really care what they're like as people. If I like the music, I like the music. I don't care if they're the biggest tosser ever or they're a really great person.
Yeah.
I'm not really that bothered. But my view of Bono is I think he's a pretty decent guy. He wants to do the right thing. He's used his fame in the way that he's decided to use it, and he's decided to do what he thinks is the right thing. And he has copped a lot of flack for that, and people accusing him of being saintly and wanting to big himself up and all that kind of thing.
Well, there's that old joke, isn't there, about Bono? What's the difference between God and Bono? God doesn't walk down the street thinking he's Bono.
Yeah,
but I get what you mean, because about people have this knack, don't they, of going, "Oh, I don't like him. Why not? Oh, because he's a dick." And you're like, "Well, do you know him? No. Have you spent any time with him? No. So how do you know?"
This is what I think, and I know, even though I don't always agree with absolutely everything he's done and said, I just think it's his right to do that, and I also think that the double standard kind of thing I find. If he'd just bought a massive mansion, spent all his money on Ferraris, shoved a load of cocaine up his nose, and had women coming to his house left, right, and centre, and whatever.
But he probably did. Enya.
then
She lived next door.
then he'd be seen as a really cool rock. He hadn't done any charity stuff,
Yeah,
but he'd
yeah.
done lots of drugs and women and whatever.
He'd be up there with Liam Gallagher.
He'd be seen as a really cool rock star.
Yeah.
But because he decided to do what he wanted to do, he's been slagged off. So I think that's maybe a bit unfair.
Yeah. I quite like Bono. I don't, I like people with a slight touch of arrogance. I like Jose Mourinho. Obviously, I'm a Liam Gallagher fan because a lot of this stuff is, bravado, isn't it? It's sort of pull up for the cameras now. Probably behind closed doors, and they're completely different people.
Well, they're an interesting band to see interviewed because they are intelligent, they're thoughtful.
Yeah.
They've never really done the rock and roll rebellion thing. I mean, they're very different to the way that Oasis conducted themselves. U2 were more earnest and a little bit, maybe even a little bit too serious in the early days, but that was just who they were. They were being true to themselves. And Oasis, on the other hand, knocked off a lot of people by acting the way they did. My view is
they knocked everybody off.
Exactly. My view is I don't care. To me, that's just all the hype around them. Whatever. I don't really care what they were like or what they did or how many drugs they took. I just whether I like the records is the only thing that I'm really that interested in.
It's like a boxer, isn't it? All the bravado and all the trash talk doesn't matter about that. It's if you get hit and go down in the ring, that's all that matters.
Exactly.
It's just a circus, isn't it? Everything else around it is just a circus, really.
And if you're great at what you do, you'll be respected by those who value you being great at what you do, regardless of what you're like.
Yeah. I said I like Bono as a frontman. I think he's a good frontman. He's got a good voice. He writes good lyrics and good songs. You just have to sometimes park everything else, don't you? You have to be able to see past, like you're saying, just see what these want to hear. That's just my view anyway. But yeah.
Oh, he's a showman, and I've certainly always enjoyed his shows. I can't say fairer than that.
And I'm actually quite looking forward to going back, and not going back because I've never been back, but sort of maybe listen to a few more. I do own Rattle and Hum, Joshua Tree, Boy, All That You Can't Leave Behind, How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb.
That's quite, for someone who says they're not into U2, that's quite a lot of albums that you've got.
Yeah, what's the live album they did? Is it?
Well, the first one was Under a Blood Red Sky.
That's the one, and I've got that as well. But I've never sort of... One of the reasons we started doing this was because I've got a big vinyl collection, and I don't know how to listen to it properly. I don't immerse myself in it. I pick bits of information up when and maybe I need to pay the U2 some,
Yeah, do
more,
it. Well, dig out Boy. Start at the start. Dig out
it's always
Boy.
the best place to start, isn't it?
Then you can go to October. The consensus is that October wasn't as good as Boy, although I was speaking to a musician not long ago who told me that October is his favourite of the early U2 albums. So,
see, I didn't realise they did the album The Unforgettable Fire.
Yeah, well, that was kind of like the transition between the early stuff and the Joshua Tree, because the
sort of explosion.
Well, that was when they started working with Brian Eno, you see. So,
yeah.
The Unforgettable Fire could be seen as kind of part one, and the Joshua Tree part two. But,
yeah, almost like a double album, sort of.
Well, certainly, well, it's not really a trilogy because there wasn't a third one to fit in with them.
No.
But whatever
the
equivalent is of a trilogy when there's two, I actually don't know what that is.
I have no idea. Maybe that's why I'm always disappointed with a Kit Kat, because there's only two fingers and I'm expecting a third one. So, but How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb, I found that quite difficult to listen to first time round. It didn't seem to flow properly.
No, Bono's admitted.
Abide in memory.
Yeah, Bono himself's admitted that. He thinks he thinks that the songs, he's not dissatisfied with the songs, but he's dissatisfied with the way they all go together, and it doesn't make an album in the way that the other better albums fit together. That's his view.
Yeah, there seems to be a period in that early 2000s time. is that a phrase? The early 2000s times, where that early 2000s for me seemed to there was a lot of U2, the Charlatans, and that and obviously you had Oasis releasing albums around that time, but U2 seemed to be bigger for me around that early 2000 time than they ever did in the 90s.
Okay, that's interesting, because I thought they were the biggest in around the time of the Zoo TV tour, but maybe, well, that's just different perceptions.
No, maybe because I was probably watching more, probably listening to more music around that time, watching more things like MTV, but it just seemed to be because obviously you had things like obviously the internet coming to the fore, but there just seemed to be a point where U2 have released another song. They've released another song. Oh, there's another song. And then before you know it, there's another album. So it just seemed to be, I don't know, maybe it's just got fuzzled with time as time sort of gone on. But I did really, All That You Can't Leave Behind. I really loved that album at the time. I know you've got slight reservations on it, but I did really like that.
I don't dislike it, but I may give it another listen. You see, there's one song on there that has never... Many people, even some who don't like that album all that much, rave about the song Kite. And it's one that has never totally clicked with me as to why it's so liked and so loved. I don't dislike it, but I maybe need to give it another go. So I may do that. Well, we've just done 20 minutes on U2. No doubt we'll talk about U2 again, and no doubt we'll talk about some of the albums in more depth at some point in the future.
And I might know a bit more by
and you
then
might
as well.
Indeed know a bit more. But in the meantime, what do you think about U2? Are you a lover? Are you a hater? Are you a bit indifferent? Have you got some views on them that you'd like to vent in the comments below? That's what they're there below for. And
comment.
If you wish, do subscribe to us, give us a like, and even give us a share.
I'd like that. That would make me happy.